Hello and welcome to This Week at the Movies. I'm Matt,
And I'm Eric.
and we are back with you this week looking at a couple of interesting new releases for the middle of June. In case you didn't notice, we weren't here last week because one of us got to sail through a tropical storm on its way to becoming a hurricane, which has had lasting impacts on my ability to walk in a straight line. But I did manage to see these movies. One I saw just before I got on the cruise. One I saw today as we returned home. I'm excited to talk about them. How was your week, Eric?
It was kind of great. I saw Hitman on Netflix. I saw the Gene Wilder documentary that was on there.
Oh, that's so good.
Um,
I
oh,
saw that too.
oh, yeah. And
Netflix has some incredible documentaries right now. I know we're not doing the Gene Wilder one. I don't know if you've had a chance to see Black Barbie, but I was very taken with that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So it's been a really good week for movies, I think.
Yeah, I watched some interesting things while I was gone. Oh, I downloaded a whole bunch of random things that I would watch daily when I was on my cruise, off my phone, where I had limited, interests, like between watching a Wong Kar-wai foreign film and then chasing that with Deep Blue Sea, because nothing seemed better than watching Deep Blue Sea on the middle of a ship sailing through a hurricane. I was like,
Yeah.
it's time.
Which Wong Kar-wai movie, if you don't mind me asking?
In the Mood for Love.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah, I watched a couple of. I would watch classics, and Lindsay would be. I watched Morris Paros, which I had never seen for the first time. But then, like, I showed Lindsay Office Space.
Nice.
While we were playing games. So, mixing it up, having some fun. But that's probably a good metaphor for June because, one thing I'm going to say about the month of June, we did our first June episode. We had kind of the conventional action film in Bad Boys, Ride or Die. This week, looking as we move through June, we get kind of a big drama in The Bikeriders, a big animated film, and Inside Out 2. And next week, we'll end with one of the hotly anticipated kind of horror films of the summer in Quiet Place Day One, plus a big epic Western in Horizon, which is also the reason Kevin Costner won't finish Yellowstone. Not that I'm bitter. So one thing you will say, June has really offered something for everyone. Tonight's selection of two films, kind of a mixed bag for me. One I was really looking forward to. The other I was like, I'm sure it'll be fine. And they created opposite reactions for me. So we'll dive in. The first was last weekend's big release, which is Pixar's Inside Out 2, which returns us to the world of emotions inside Riley's head. Now Riley is about to enter puberty. She's also on the cusp of some big changes going to high school. Gets dropped with her two best friends at a hockey camp where they're hoping to impress the coach so she can make the team and find a group of friends. Just before she lands at camp, two things happen. Puberty arrives, and her two best friends let her know that they got assigned to a different high school and they won't be going to school together. A couple of massive things that shake her up. Big shakeups happening inside her head, too. Our friends' joy and anger and sadness and disgust and fear are joined by a whole new group of emotions, including ennui, which I greatly appreciated, envy, embarrassment, and their new ringleader, anxiety, voiced by Maya Hawke. And they battle for control of Riley and Riley's authentic self, which I thought was kind of an interesting idea, an interesting exploration, an interesting exploration of external and internal pressures on our psyche and how we shape ourselves and how those things can either define us or help to shape us into the people we become. I liked the first Inside Out okay. I thought it was fine. I know some people incredibly love it. I definitely ride the ride when I go to California Adventure. I don't know if you knew that they turned Inside Out to an emotion coaster, but I thought it was fine. It's been a long time. I was trying to think like how long it was 2015. So it's been a minute since we were in this Inside Out world. as we come back. So I didn't have super high expectations. I loved this movie. I'm giving it a huge thumbs up. It is actually currently my favorite animated film of the year. It's moved right up into my top three, or top four for the year, for 2023, and it's in my top three of all-time favorite Pixar films too. I am a big the Pixar films that have really resonated with me have gotten to me emotionally and made me think about the world in a certain way. Coco is my number one. I really love Toy Story 3, and Toy Story 3 is one that I likened to this movie. I saw it in an audience, full of kids and adults, and there's a lot of it that plays out that works really well for younger audiences as an animated film. But I thought there was a layer to this film that really appeals to probably older audience members who are thinking about life and thinking about the ideas that get brought up here. It's not a perfect movie, but it really got to me emotionally. And was really satisfying for me. I really enjoyed the ride.
Yeah. Inside Out 2, I'm just going to say right off the bat, I think I would give it 2 thumbs up if I weren't occasionally distracted by being able to almost beat for beat follow like the first movie, just take out one thing and insert something to replace it. Take out the imaginary friend, replace it with the dog that's like Dora the Explorer with the pouch. You take away them falling off into the abyss and replace that with them being lost with the tube gone back home. And, it's Joy gets kicked out of the central brain and has to make her way back. And instead of going for core memories, she's going for her sense of self. And it's 1-to-1 very close to being like beat for beat, but like if it weren't for the fact that I was watching it play out that way, this is a completely unique story about adolescence that is completely different conceptually from what's going on in Inside Out. And I think the two of them pair well together as a story about depression and then a story about anxiety. And those are sometimes two sides of a mental health coin. And I'm really excited about the idea of them being paired together, but this one, anxiety is something like, I think some of the Pixar films that you talked about, Coco and Toy Story 3, they resonate emotionally and they deal with like very human experiences. And I think the way this is going to impact an individual, I think depends on how much you can identify with the experience being explored. Like that shift of Andy to saying goodbye to his childhood. That is pretty a large common experience. Like there are some people who would see it who maybe haven't had that kind of transition in their life, but you can see how that would hit a lot of people. Inside Out, I can understand, like there are some people who that movie hits them really hard because they've been through a depressive episode where they changed and lost touch with their friends, lost a little bit of a sense of their ability to be in touch with their emotions and numb out and all these kind of things. And just as true as that movie is to depression, this is to anxiety, panic attacks, the idea that being afraid for the future can consume your whole identity. And there is no other Pixar movie, I think, that has hit like a truer or more identifiable vein for me. And so I have to say that there's like kind of a bias here. And I think that's why I'm backing down to 1 thumb up from 2 thumbs up, because I almost can't be objective about like, did this or that work? I love nostalgia, that joke, like the times that it came up. I love most of the performances. I think Maya Hawke is incredible, to the point that I really, really resented the character at some but like from the moment her anxiety-based identity takes hold until the end credits of the movie, I was an emotional wreck. Like I couldn't keep it together with what was going on, and realizing how familiar some of the things she was going through were, and just the idea of like, what if we did have control over that, to everybody like hugging her identity, like this like child-friendly representation of being embraced, you embracing yourself for who you are, because it's her own mind. Like I whoa.
Well, and I guess one thing too that I would say is in these films, I don't know if it's just because of the way, because we're in Riley's head, they make it seem like this is something you go through during your childhood and then are able to put away. It shows her parents as, oh, I remember those days. Like it does. No, those are things I've still identified with and think about, those pressures that you still have to go through. And probably the part I liked most was the constant evolution of the true self, blending in your experiences, not being afraid of embracing, negative experiences too. Those help shape us as well. You can't just shield yourself off from every bad experience. That was something that they went through. That was, that's in my favorite of the Star Wars movies, The Last Jedi. That is essentially the final lesson that Yoda gives Luke is the bad things, the things that we tried to do that did not work out for us are just as informative in helping shape us and helping us move forward as the things we excelled on. You can't just pretend to be one thing. It's like the mixture of all of them. And so I appreciated the first one. It's not I didn't like it.
Sure.
But this one just hit in a different way. And maybe it's like what you said, maybe you identify with the emotional trauma that it was bringing up for them, for the characters and putting everything into shape. And I just thought it was a great job by the writing and directing crew. Very strong voice crew. There were a couple of minor changes to some of the voice cast. Liz Lapira takes over from Mindy Kaling as discussed. Tony Hale joined as Fear, but I was glad to have Phil Smith back as Sadness, and some of the new voices were really fun. Io Adibri as Envy. I always love Lewis Black as Anger. Ennui made me laugh too.
Ennui was great. Yeah.
Adele Arshopoulos was the one that voiced that. So yeah, I think that it was a very fascinating film. The second film that we have to look at, the one that came out that's the big release this week, was actually potentially going to be a big release at the end of last year, and that is The Bikeriders. The film comes from writer-director Jeff Nichols. It is based on a book which is based on a set of true interviews that took place. So that's kind of interesting. It features Austin Butler as Benny and Tom Hardy as Johnny. They're two guys who are very close and friends. Johnny is the founder of the Chicago motorcycle club, the Vandals. Benny is a big part of that group. The film takes place roughly between 1965 and 1973, as the interviews did. Into this comes Kathy, played by Jodie Comer, who comes across Benny at a bar. They fall in love. They get married within 5 weeks. And she and Johnny, in some ways, are battling over who gets control of Benny, because she worries that this motorcycle club will eventually lead to his death or something incredibly negative. This one started to make the festival rounds at the end of last year, got some really good reviews. We thought it was going to be an awards player. They ended up kicking it to this summer so it could compete this year. I was very curious to see it. I thought Austin Butler was great when we saw him in Dune Part 2. I was curious to see how, I thought he was great in Masters of the Air earlier this year. Been a big year for him. How is he going to come through? The accents were a lot. Jodie Comer is super British. For those who have seen Killing Eve, she's also an incredible actress, very smooth, completely different part, but that accent felt authentic to a certain type of Chicago accent, but was also a lot. Austin Butler seemed to me in this movie much more removed from. I know people have complained that he has Elvis voice and everything. I didn't really feel that here.
Right.
So hopefully all those complaints will die away. I liked the three actors. I liked the basic tenets of their back and forth performances. I just didn't think the story executed correctly. I'm going to end up giving this one thumbs neutral. I was really looking forward to seeing it. I've been reflecting, in the many, many minutes I've had since seeing it. So I finished, I saw this one earlier today, but when I've been thinking about it, trying to put my thumb on it, I feel like maybe the structure of how the story was told prevented us from getting into it a little bit. I don't feel like I knew that much about the club. You only get pieces of how it was founded or what their even purpose is, or they make reference to a couple of them having jobs, but how do the other ones support themselves?
Right.
They make reference to this kind of fiery, quick romance between Kathy and Benny, but we don't really see much other than he stands vigil outside of her house until he can convince her boyfriend to leave for 24 hours. How that worked, I'm still unclear. And, they're supposedly vying for him, but it's unclear how he feels about either of them, honestly, if we're being honest. For something that's almost a love triangle in some ways, there wasn't a whole lot of romance. You don't have enough. I guess I didn't have enough of that buy-in between Kathy and Benny, and I had probably had more of a buy-in in the fraternal bond between Johnny and Benny. So it didn't. And then he just ghosts them both, which was a choice. Of course, if you're basing it off of history, you kind of got to do that. I wonder if the structure, you getting a lot of this in Kathy's interviews with a aspiring photojournalist, I guess, played by Mike Feist. They don't really ever explain exactly what his project is, but at various points he's interviewing the members. I almost wonder if this would have been a story that worked better if we did not have that construct to drop us in and to be providing pieces, and rather she was our POV into the world in a more organic and authentic way, in that she goes to meet her friend and sparks fly, and you can see that relationship, rather than we're essentially being told all these things, that they have a great love and that they're, because she's doing, she's telling him this in interviews and telling their story in interviews, but you don't build up for me enough, and I felt somewhat of a disconnect.
I think I'm going to take a weird departure here. I think this might be a dialogue a little bit, but I'm actually going to go so far as to say is what I think my takeaway is from this is that it is not about the romance between Jodie Comer and Austin Butler in a way that it could have been. I'll agree with that. But I do think the entire thing is massively nostalgic and romantic. I think it is about characters who yearn to be James Dean and Marlon Brando, and the way that spark of that culture created this club where people belonged and fit in, and how much they wish things were like that. And the whole reason the story is framed from someone looking back on that time is so they can look back on those memories the way the characters all probably look back and think, the way things used to be before gang culture became so toxic and invasive and became something it wasn't. I think Jodie Comer is the person, probably because of the interview source from the book. There's probably something branching off of that. You could have reevaluated that, but I don't think Benny is the kind of character. I think it's very poignant that he is reserved emotionally, and that he is sort of free-spirited and goal-oriented and aimed at one thing. And I think the story from his perspective would have been very similar to what we got, in the sense that things were right and then they were corrupted and fell apart. And I just think the angle we get on that is someone who watched him from the outside. And I don't think we would get it from Johnny's perspective, aligning the camera, whether it was a story being told or whether we were just following them. I think there's something different about a story where it's all happening in the present and you're following, and then this character dies and they go after this character and you don't know what's going to happen. Something about being detached from it and looking back and saying like, yeah, it was tragic when so-and-so died, and you're sort of primed for what you're about to experience, and then you go live through it. And I'm thinking particularly of, I don't know the actor's name, but is the one who played Charlie Chaplin in both Mindhunter and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. His name starts with a B in the movie, but anyways, he's like the one that Austin Butler said should have taken over instead of him. But
yes, I know who you're talking about. You're talking about Damon. Harriman, Brucey.
Yes, Brucey. And like a story like that, I feel like that would have been different if we were just watching the story as a series of events that played out. It's the structure of this was very interesting because I do feel like we're cutting around the point. And I think that comes from the point of view of the interviewer, is someone who was a part of the gang. He knows all of those parts. He knows certain details, and those aren't the questions that he would be asking. The questions that he's asking is really, what happened after I left? Like, what is the deal? And I don't think we get enough of that. I think it's interesting how, even though we do get a shot of his home life, the kid who ends up going after Johnny in the end, he's somehow very one note, even though we got that little insight or whatever. It just seems like he represents villainy rolling in and infecting this thing. And I don't know, like,
those are a little bit of the... So I wasn't, maybe I wasn't clear. I wasn't suggesting I wanted the movie from Benny's point of view. I still think she's the right POV character, but not doing interviews like that. If we were seeing the reactions to things like Brucey's storyline, that is a perfect example. She basically talks about for 2 or 3 minutes that he died and the aftermath before you get put into a scene that might have actually had some emotional weight if you hadn't just been told it happened.
See, I think it carries it. It would have been like a shock, oh my gosh, it happened, sort of emotional hit, versus a, oh my gosh, this is tragic sort of thing. Like, I feel like it does.
What makes it tragic, and you see in a clip of an interview that he provides that his family's at odds with his lifestyle. What exactly is their lifestyle? Because I get what you're saying about the Marlon Brando. They really tried to drive that home, that he was watching on TV and saw that movie and wanted. But how did they move from being like a racing group to this club? And then essentially they seem like some people that hang out and drink. What does it mean to be in the club? How do you get into the club? None of that ever really comes to fruition. Right. And then you have also the non-sequential way that they decided to drop it in, because you're dropped into a very kind of violent opening sequence, and that's going to lead to a big bout of retribution. But how does a guy who likes racing motorcycles, who's married to a seemingly normal lady with a couple of daughters, go from a group of motorcycle enthusiasts that like to race to burning down a bar and having enough cachet with that group that the fire department and the police department are just watching it burn and afraid to move on those guys? They're afraid of us now. Why are they afraid of you? What else have you done? They never really indicate. I thought the club was going to be going into criminal affairs. It almost seems like he's completely opposed from that. Okay, then what do you actually do? What brings all these people together? Are they really just guys that like motorcycles, because it's sort of unclear, because even from her first entry into that bar, there's like an air that these are some rough and tumble characters, even though
Right. No, they don't
you're
actually rough
also
or
trying
tumble.
to say, and other things like I read an article where Michael Shannon has kind of this speech about trying to get into Vietnam and stuff. I
Yeah.
thought that was kind of a sad, weird window. Apparently,
Mhm.
Michael Shannon also did. I read a thing from Jeff Nichols. Yeah, he didn't see the humor in it. Guess what, buddy? I didn't see the humor in it either. So if
Right.
so now, did I not understand some of the tones? There are moments
No.
that are really good and that really works, but it's too disjointed. Even with the interview construct, we jump right to her post 1973 interviews where we can tell things have changed, and you already know the group came apart. You just don't know exactly in what ways it came apart in the middle. And then you go back and then you have more of her interviews from 65. So even the interviews telling the larger structure of the story are not sequential. Nothing about it is sequential. I wonder if they would have made a more straightforward movie about a girl from the outside falling in love and getting pulled into this, and then wondering whether her love was going to be enough to save him, because judging by how it ends, that is, he made a choice,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that
I
choice doesn't feel earned based on all of their interactions to me.
I will give you, there is, if this is Goodfellas, it's like Goodfellas if you never once saw them actually engaged in crime.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
And
were they supposed to be criminals? I mean,
well,
you get the
I'm not
sense
saying they
when
have to,
he's.
I'm not saying they have to
I
be
know, but you
criminals,
get the
but you're
sense
right. We
even from the
don't.
beginning when he gets challenged, he's like fists or knives, and you're like,
Right. It's like,
just
oh,
got
there
real.
must be
But
violence
they
in their
had like a
culture, but
family
then
picnic and then beat the living daylights
see,
out.
that's the thing. I kind of love that moment. And for me, I feel like that is the kind of thing where I rewatch it. There will be answers to questions that I can fill in, but I don't have to fill in. Where I just, and there was a reaction, there was laughter in the theater here, where there's some confusion in, I don't understand what's going on here. There's a gang squaring off with another gang. And I think, like, in that moment, Austin Butler is the audience character who's like, oh, there's going to be a fight. Go. And just immediately is like, this is what this is supposed to be, right? But then it so rapidly de escalates. It's like one person gets hurt, and it's like, oh, this is crazy. Nobody wants to do this. And it just like kind of disappears. And it's weird because it's kind of like, it's like the characters are all charged up because they want to be something, but then they don't actually seem to be what they want to be, and then this awful culture comes rolling in and takes over, and it becomes about rape and hard drugs and all of this other stuff, and then they're like, I want no part of this. It's like, it's almost like I want the answer to the question, what did you all want? Did you just want a unit that you could be? If so, why did you grow the numbers of the people who were involved in the club? Like, what was the process? Like, I can't imagine that they were just like, oh, these guys, they seem like good guys. Let's get hundreds of people across multiple states just because we all want to fit in. It's like, it's not even a club at that point. It's just, there's something about it that is left completely unanswered.
Yeah, and that's probably the part. And when I was looking, that's probably some of the struggle I've had with Jeff Nichols films. At times, there aren't any that I dislike, but Take Shelter, Mud.
Oh, I want to see
To
Mud.
me, there are parts of it that I really like, and then parts of it that just don't quite work for me. Midnight Special has probably come the closest to completing things for me, and probably just because it was a different kind of genre. He also made a film that I think was largely overlooked called Loving, which is about this first couple, that interracial couple that got married and challenged the law in Virginia. That was based
with
on Ruth Nega and
Wallace.
I'm
Jason Clark.
no,
I don't know
it's not Jason Clark. It's Joel Edgerton.
It is. Oh yeah, it's Joel Edgerton.
Joel Edgerton and Ruth Nega. And there were pieces of that I really loved too. It didn't totally come together. And so none of them have I disliked. All of them I thought had massive potential, and sometimes it just doesn't all come together for me. And that's similarly how I felt with Bikeriders. There are big pieces of it that I think have potential, and there were parts of it that I was really tracking with, but then it just, and especially I just think for me, probably that last act, it's very curious why he takes off, and then he comes back, and I wasn't surprised. I know it's probably supposed to be a twist that they're together there in doing, but I knew exactly where we were going with this. I just didn't have a good emotional foundation for why that felt like an earned choice, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can understand vibe-wise, tone-wise, production-wise, why someone at a film festival would see this and think like, ooh, this has an appeal to it for an audience, and this is going to resonate with some people. And then they kind of like attach things like The Outsiders and like, again, James Dean, Marlon Brando, that kind of thing. And they think, ooh, this has nostalgia to it. This is going to be some kind of thing. But I think that might have shot it in the foot a little bit, where some people hyped it up too much based on thinking it was going to resonate in a way that I don't think it does.
Well, it's very well made. I would have enjoyed more time. This is probably one of those rare movies where if they made it 45 minutes longer, it might have been better.
Yeah, actually, I could have that, like sunk in.
You had some interesting supporting characters played by people like Michael Shannon and Boyd Holbrook and Norman Reedus and Damon Harriman. And I would have enjoyed learning a little bit more about them and their bonds and their and how the club came together. And I think literally, if you dropped the interview aspect out of it too, that's been a strong feeling for me coming out of it, that
you can even still have the character be recording people, and you can do the same thing they did with the credits with like the nostalgic trip with the pictures and things like that. And I think that would still work really well, even without it being like an interview structure for the thing. So, yeah.
But a couple of interesting movies. We've had an interesting and a pretty good summer so far. I am very excited to see how we finish up June, and then July has some bigger ones. We'll have if you like the dichotomy between today's animated feature and live action feature, just wait till that first weekend in July when we get Despicable Me 4 and Maxine on the same weekend.
We should definitely do both of those.
Yeah, I figured that we would.
Yeah.
What would be incredible is if somebody went and saw both of them back to back on the same day. Just what kind of a theater going experience would that be?
And also, which one do you watch first? You'd think Despicable Me would help ease your mind after the one, but I don't know.
I don't know either. Well, that'll do it for us this week. Until next time, we will see you at the movies. Have a wonderful week.